with complete coverage of the Utah Hockey Club. This is Cole Bagley of KSLSports.com on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Cole, happy Friday. How are you?
Good. How are you guys doing?
We're doing terrific. Off-season has officially begun for the Utah Hockey Club, but it does sound like some locals are going to be playing over the summer at the World Championships. What does it mean, and who got picked up?
Yeah, it's always an honor, I think, for these guys to be selected by their national teams to play at that level, whether it's the Olympics, whether it's Four Nations, or whether it's the World Championships. Each guy takes it with pride, and it's a good opportunity for them to keep playing hockey at a high level. Obviously, it's not the highest possible level because the best players in the world, for the most part, are still playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs. But for those that aren't, again, like I said, it's a good opportunity to play other, top skaters around the world. So for Utah right now, 3 Americans and Cooley, Keller, and Kesselring will be representing the Stars and Stripes at World Championships, and then Karel Vejmelka will be playing for Czechia. Between the pipes, I expect probably a few more. There's still some time before those complete rosters are finalized and whatnot. We'll see if guys like Gunther or Ian Cole or any of those other players will end up on those rosters. But for now, just those 4.
What do you think is going to be the biggest storyline this offseason, or even give us a couple of things that fans really need to be aware of?
Yeah, first and foremost, free agency is going to be huge. The conversations that the front office has had over the last week and a half have significantly shifted. The overlying theme and kind of message from Bill Armstrong in this, the first inaugural season was, Utah just wanted to play meaningful hockey, and they were able to do that. But they never really strayed away from that. They never really, accelerated it to, we should be in the playoffs, or, we're going to be pushing for the Stanley Cup or anything like that. So it was fairly reserved, right? It was just, hey, we're competitive enough to play meaningful hockey. But now, overnight, like I said, things kind of shifted, and the expectations for next season are playoffs or bust. And while this team is, certainly built, I think, to make the playoffs the way that they are currently constructed, they've got a lot of money to go spend, roughly $22 million to go play with in free agency. There's a lot of very talented free agents who, should be hitting the market here in the next couple months. And Utah is set on taking some big swings, so we'll see what happens there. Additionally, we're going to see 2 prospects emerge from the pipeline in Danil Boat and Dmitry Simashev. They're going to begin contract negotiations with both those guys as soon as the KHL season comes to a conclusion. So there will be some new faces on this team, which is exciting because, these are players that should help, Utah kind of lift themselves towards, not just making the playoffs, but, being a fairly dangerous team.
Is $22 million sounds like a lot, but in context, does half the league have $22 million to play with? Do teams have 40, 50? Where does it stack up?
It's definitely one of the higher, amounts of money that anybody's going to be able to go and play with this season. That's as Chris Armstrong put it, that's enough money and assets to be in any conversation this offseason, whether it's, the top free agent in Mitch Marner or guys like Sam Bennett or Brock Boeser, Ehlers, who's going to be a free agent following this season with New Jersey. It's a lot of money. I don't know exactly where it stacks up with the rest of the league, but it's enough that they can entertain any conversation, so which it's going to be interesting, right? Most of the conversations lately have been, Utah's going to be a free agent destination. There's no reason that it shouldn't. And we'll see kind of how that turns out. But, I think in terms of, kind of that top end money, Mitch Marner, who's currently, got a 3-0 lead with the Toronto Maple Leafs in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I think he's probably going to fetch somewhere between $13 and $14 million. And like I said, Utah's got the ability to bring him in if there's, interest on both sides.
What did you learn, or what was your takeaway from the end-of-season media availability with the players or the coach or the front office?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was just how much, the front office and everybody, the players, the coaches, everybody loved Utah. And I think that's refreshing, right? I mean, this state has been – a market where free agents, especially, in the NBA, have not necessarily been interested in coming and playing. It's been written off so many times, but, hockey culture is just different. And, the guys just loved their time here. They were, consistently surprised by the reception that they had, whether it was the fan base, their neighbors out in the community. So, I think that was kind of the biggest, message was, hockey is here to stay in Utah.
Looking at free agency quickly, do you think they're more in need of a top-tier star, the Mitch Marner type, or some of the, a guy who's going to garner $13, $14 million, or would they be better off with, $3, $7 million players or $4, $5 million players to fill out the depth? What would help this team more?
It's a really good question. And then I think, what Bill Armstrong talked about in his exit interview was, wanting to spend money wisely. And he kind of alluded to the Nashville Predators. While he didn't, fully call them out, he used a certain team that thought they spent money really well last offseason, that thought they won the offseason, right? They brought in, 2 future Hall of Famers, 2, former all-stars, who they thought was, going to elevate them to become a Stanley Cup contender. Well, they ended up being one of the worst teams in the National Hockey League this year. And so he used that, again, he didn't call them out by name, but he used that example to kind of outline and explain that, look, we want to make sure that we do this the right way. We don't want to just go and spend money to spend money and think, oh, well, because we won the offseason on paper, that means that we're going to, end up winning the Stanley Cup or, being one of the best teams in the National Hockey League. And so to answer your question, I think if a guy like Mitch Marner is willing to come to Utah, you absolutely sign a guy like that. He had 100 points this season. He would, I think provide a lot of what Utah was missing up front with their forwards. It really came down to Keller and Cooley and Gunther and Schmaltz to really provide most of the offensive production. I mean, if you look at Keller, he had 90 points. The next guy in line had 65. The next few, Gunther and Schmaltz had, I think, high 50s. And then from there, it was just a significant drop-off. So you need more offense. And I think as well as you're trying to establish a culture here, like I said, if a guy like Marner that's a top free agent that's very talented, he's already an all-star. He was on Canada's Four Nations team. He'll probably play for Team Canada in the Olympics, and he can produce triple points. You sign a guy like that. But if those conversations don't necessarily go the way that you're hoping, I think it's, you go more the route of, all right, well, we can't get Marner, who are two or three other guys around that, maybe $6, $7, $8 million price tag that we can bring in and we can elevate multiple lines.
Who are you liking in the playoffs, Cole?
The thing about the Stanley Cup playoffs that I think is incredible is the parity. I did one of those bracket challenges, and I think it's already busted. I had the Vegas Golden Knights winning the whole thing. Well, right now the Minnesota Wild are up 2-1 over them, and there's a whole bunch of other situations kind of going opposite of the way I think that we anticipate. I mean, the LA Kings are up 2-0 over the Edmonton Oilers, who were in a Game 7 Stanley Cup final a year ago. So what's fun is the parity. In terms of who I like, I would love to see the Washington Capitals get it done. I grew up a Pittsburgh Penguins fan, and so I was the last guy to want to see Ovechkin lift the cup and be successful just because of that heated rivalry. But I think as I've gotten older and watched the league a lot more, and obviously now it's my occupation, I would love to see Ovi, lift the cup the same year that he breaks Gretzky's record. Aside from that, though, I just want to see good hockey games, and that's what we've been provided with through this first round.
I'm surprised we don't hear more about Ovi potentially retiring. Do you think he's coming back regardless of what happens this year, or if he does get that storybook, season, breaking Gretzky's record, lifting the Stanley Cup, do you think he'd hang it up?
So about a week ago, he was asked if he was going to retire, and he said no.
Yeah.
And I think that goes right along with his personality. He's one of those guys, he's got that, same competitive level of the Michael Jordans and the LeBron James of the basketball world, where he's striving for greatness. He wants to be the best, and, he's still playing at an elite level. I mean, I think he was like third or fourth in goals scored this year, and he's like 40 years old, and his diet consists of hot Cheetos and Nesquik, and the guy is just built to play hockey, and so I think he'll even if they win the cup, I think he keeps going.
Ben, Jaromir Jagr is still playing at like 64.
He owns the team, and he plays for the team.
These are hockey players. When are you going to get? These aren't soft basketball players. These are hockey players. Ovi's not going anywhere.
Well, he could if he wanted to. That's the thing. He's done. What more is he going to accomplish?
He's going
900 goals?
He's going to be playing until President Trump's third term. I mean, he's going to be playing forever.
I think he wants another cup. I really do.
Yeah.
He's only got one. And like I said, there's, as much as it's a respected rivalry, him and Sid are often compared to each other. They're obviously very different players. And, obviously Ovi has the goal record on him, which will be remembered more than the cups will. But, for him, I think he's searching for one more.
The only reason Gordie Howe isn't playing right now is because he's dead.
Yeah, exactly.
Cole, thank you very much. We always look forward to it on Fridays. You're the man.
See you, Cole.
Thanks, guys.